You think an 11-year-old solved that test on his own? Miss Trask hissed, slamming the paper onto Principal Cho's desk. Outside the glass window of Conference Room B, teachers gathered in stunned silence as Malik Jennings' sleeves rolled down and, pencil in hand, calmly explained solutions that left even district evaluators speechless. No one was talking now, not because they didn't believe him, but because they finally realized they'd never bothered to listen. It started like any other Tuesday morning at Hamilton Ridge Middle School in Columbus, Ohio. The school building buzzed with sleepy chatter, locker doors slamming shut, the faint scent of cafeteria cinnamon toast sticks drifting down the halls. But in room 204, the tension was sharp enough to cut through the air. Ms. Evelyn Trask stood at the whiteboard, her back straight, every movement crisp and precise. She was the kind of teacher who never tolerated whispering, who timed quizzes with a stopwatch, who corrected posture as quickly as she corrected equations. And seated near the back of the room, hoodie sleeves tugged low over his wrists, pencil spinning between his fingers, sat Malik Jennings. He didn't look like trouble. He didn't act like it either. Malik was the kind of kid who spoke only when necessary, who turned in every assignment early, who found patterns in everything, number sequences, sidewalk tiles, even the way tree branches split in even intervals outside the classroom window. He wasn't a show-off. He didn't raise his hand to be noticed. But every time a test came back, graded there, it was again another perfect score. Another margin scribbled with alternate methods he hadn't been taught in class. Miss Trask didn't like that. She had been teaching for 30 years and believed in structure and routine, in sticking to the lesson plan. Giftedness, to her, needed paperwork. If the district hadn't labeled you advanced, then you weren't. It was that simple. So when Malik aced the district's advanced math placement exam, a test normally reserved for 8th graders, something in her snapped. Not because she thought he had guessed. No, the answers were too clean for that, too neat, too confident. She thought he cheated. That morning she didn't smile when handing back the test. She didn't say excellent work or well done. Instead, she stared at him for a long moment, lips pressed into a thin line, before walking to her desk, lifting the phone, and dialing the front office. Malik, unaware, was already sketching out problems in the margins of his next worksheet, lost in the rhythm of numbers. By lunchtime, Principal Darren Cho had a copy of the test on his desk. He reviewed it while chewing the cap of his pen, eyes narrowing as he traced the students' work. Every step was documented. The answers weren't just correct, they were explained. And the method Malik had used on 2 of the word problems wasn't one they covered in school. It was something else, more advanced. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Cho said when Ms. Trask stepped into his office with arms crossed and a hard glint in her eye. "I'm not jumping," she replied coolly. "I'm following the evidence." And just like that, the case was escalated. The district's academic integrity team was notified. Dr. Renee Hollowell, a quiet but sharp-eyed evaluator who had handled dozens of similar investigations, was scheduled to visit. Malik was called into the counseling office the next day. He sat across from Dr. Hollowell, who smiled kindly, her voice calm and without judgment. "We're not accusing you of anything," she said, sliding a folder in front of her. "We just want to understand how you approach the exam." Malik glanced at the folder, then back at her. "I just solved it," she nodded. "And where did you learn the methods you used? The ones that weren't covered in your class?" "I watch videos sometimes, online, and I like to try the problems in the back of the book, even if we haven't gotten to them yet." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "Would you be willing to take a similar test again, just to help us understand your thinking?" Malik hesitated. "Okay," he said finally. 2 days later, he walked into conference room B, a quiet space usually used for staff meetings. A long table stretched through the center of the room. A packet of test problems lay on one end. On the other sat Dr. Hollowell, a digital recorder, and a small notepad. Principal Cho stood just outside the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Take your time," Dr. Hollowell said, gesturing for him to sit. "You can solve the problems however you'd like, and if you're comfortable, I'd love for you to explain your process out loud." Malik nodded, slipped his backpack off his shoulder, and took his seat. He opened the packet, scanned the first problem, a complex geometry proof, and started writing. No erasing, no hesitation. Just clean logical steps with diagrams drawn neatly in the margins. As he worked, more observers gathered outside the window. The math department chair, a curriculum supervisor, Even Mr. Pina, the janitor, who had once called Malik the quiet calculator. They watched through the glass, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to stay away. Inside the room, Malik kept solving. He narrated parts of his thinking aloud, barely above a whisper. This part's easier if I factor the quadratic first. The square root shortcut saves 2 steps here. The pattern repeats every 3 terms, so I just isolate the odd numbers. Dr. Hollowell wrote furiously in her notebook, not about the answers, but about the way he noticed patterns before they were obvious, how he skipped unnecessary steps without missing logic. How his calm focus was rooted in real comprehension, not memorization. By the second hour, he had completed every problem. She set down her pen. "Malik," she said softly, "where did you learn to think this way?" He looked at her, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," he shrugged. "I just like figuring things out. I do it a lot at home." She nodded again. "That's clear." Outside the room, Principal Cho exhaled deeply. That afternoon, Malik returned to class. Miss Trask glanced at him briefly, then back at her whiteboard. She didn't say anything, but the silence felt different, now charged defensive. During the lesson, she made a miscalculation in a percentage conversion problem. Malik noticed, raised his hand. She didn't call on him. The next day, whispers started spreading. He took the test again. They watched him do it. He didn't mess up once. A 7th grader in the hallway called him the human calculator. Malik kept his head down, hoodie sleeves, tugged low mechanical pencil tucked behind his ear. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table while Aunt Carla stirred spaghetti sauce in a pan behind him. His spiral notebook lay open, 6 equations sketched out in blue ink. "What you working on, genius?" she asked, smiling. "Just something with square roots and cube roots. Seeing if there's a pattern between them?" Carla chuckled. "You know most kids play video games to relax, right?" Malik grinned. "Numbers make more sense." She leaned over and kissed the top of his head. "Well, I think you make perfect sense." The next morning, Dr. Hollowell sent an official report to the district. No signs of academic dishonesty. Student displayed mastery-level problem solving and explained methods not taught in class. But the report didn't stay quiet. Word spread. Teachers began asking each other questions. If Malik could be doubted so easily, how many others had been overlooked and why? In room 204, Miss Trask still stood straight-backed at her whiteboard, still timed her quizzes to the second. But her eyes flicked to Malik more often now. When he raised his hand during the next lesson, she called on him. He explained a problem clearly, step by step. She paused, nodded once, and said, "Correct." It was a small word, but it was new. What came next, the conversations, the consequences, the quiet ripple of change wasn't about a single test anymore. It was about what the test had revealed, about a boy who solved problems for fun, and about a system that wasn't ready to see him until he proved himself twice, and even then, only in silence. The morning after Malik's supervised retest, the halls of Hamilton Ridge felt different, quieter in the way people get when they're waiting for something to land. Word had already begun to leak, not loudly, not with official statements, but through knowing glances, muttered conversations between teachers and students, whispering at lockers. "He took it again, right? Did he mess up this time?" "Nah, they said he finished faster than before." In room 204, Ms. Trask stood at her podium, calling attendance in her usual clipped tone, but her posture had changed. Her voice was flat, her jaw tight, and when she got to Jennings Malik, she didn't look up. Malik, seated in the same spot he always chose, 3rd row from the back, far enough to observe, close enough to focus, simply said, "Here." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The retest had gone exactly as he knew it would. He'd solved each problem the way he always did, methodically, patiently, sometimes even aloud when asked. Dr. Hollowell hadn't said much afterward, only that she appreciated his time and would be submitting her findings to the district. But the look in her eyes, somewhere between impressed and regretful, told him everything. He wasn't the one under scrutiny anymore. She knew, and soon everyone else would too. By lunchtime, Principal Cho had received Dr. Hollowell's official report. He read it twice in his office, the words confirming what some had suspected all along and what others hadn't dared to believe. Student demonstrates genuine conceptual understanding. No evidence of dishonesty or external coaching. Approach is consistent with advanced independent learning. The report didn't stay on his desk for long. Copies were sent to the superintendent, the district curriculum director, and formally but with unmistakable purpose back to Ms. Trask. She read it behind her locked classroom door lips, pursed her eyes scanning for the sentence she feared most. It was their third paragraph. Students' thinking suggests a high-potential learner whose style may not align with traditional instructional models. That sentence wasn't just about Malik. It was about her. By the end of the week, the news had quietly threaded itself through Hamilton Ridge's faculty. It was subtle, nobody said it out loud, but the mood shifted. Teachers started talking in the lounge near the coffee pot in short bursts and lowered tones. "You heard about the retest, right? Nailed it," they said. "Never should have been accused in the first place." Well, that wasn't just about one test. And somewhere between those conversations came the turning point. An email sent by a parent whose daughter had been in Ms. Trask's class 3 years prior. Her name was Miranda Hall. Her daughter Zoe, now a junior in high school, had once been told she wasn't a math person by Ms. Trask in 7th grade. The email sent to Superintendent Klein read, "I didn't say anything at the time. I figured maybe my daughter misunderstood. But after reading about Malek Jennings and how his abilities were questioned, I'm realizing it wasn't just her imagination. It was a pattern." That message was forwarded, then forwarded again. Within days, more followed: parents, former students, even a retired teacher who had once mentored under Trask during her early years. Stories began stacking up like overdue library books. A father wrote, "My son stopped trying in math after being ignored all year. He used to love numbers." Another parent recalled her daughter coming home crying after being told, "Let someone else try, this one's too hard for you." Principal Cho, caught between the rising tide and a need for due process, initiated an internal review. Student feedback surveys were reopened, not just from Malik's year, but from prior years. Patterns emerged. Specific comments resurfaced. "She always picks the same students. She never lets us explain our thinking. If you're quiet, she skips over you." Cho didn't say anything publicly, not yet, but he took notes. Lots of them. Meanwhile, Malik became something else entirely. Not just the boy who beat the test, not just the kid who didn't cheat. He became the example, the quiet force other students now leaned toward. During lunch, classmates who never sat near him started sliding their trays across the table. Some asked about math homework. Others just wanted to know what book he was reading that day. One afternoon, a 7th grader named Gavin approached him shyly and said, "I used to think I was dumb in math. But I saw you figure out that sequence problem, and I tried it last night, and it made sense." Malik looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "It's all about patterns," he said. "You just have to know what to look for." Word reached the district office that Malik had become a sort of quiet mentor. Dr. Hollowell, moved by what she'd seen, requested to meet with him again, not for an investigation this time, but to learn. "How do you approach a problem you don't understand?" she asked one afternoon, in the library, notebook in hand. Malik thought for a moment, then said, "I look at it sideways. I try to see what's missing. And I try different paths until one feels right." She nodded slowly, then asked, "Would you be willing to share that with some teachers? Help them understand how students like you think?" Malik hesitated. He didn't like crowds. He didn't like talking too much. But something in him knew it mattered. "Okay," he said quietly, "if it helps." Back in room 204, Ms. Trask continued teaching with the same structure, the same cold efficiency. But something had cracked. She noticed the way students looked at her differently, less trusting, more careful. She noticed Malik's calm stare, not defiant, not smug, just present. One day when she made a mistake in a formula on the board and Malik raised his hand, she paused. The room held its breath. Then, for the first time in weeks, she said, "Go ahead." He explained the correction in 2 clean steps. She said nothing, but she erased the board and kept going, and everyone noticed. Behind the scenes, things moved quickly. Superintendent Klein called for a broader evaluation of gifted identification protocols across the district. The Board of Education added equity and learning access to its next agenda. And Malik received an invitation to speak at the county's annual Equity in Education Forum. "We'd like to hear your story," the letter read. "We believe your experience can help us better support students who are too often overlooked." Aunt Carla read the letter out loud at the kitchen table, her hand on Malik's shoulder. "Baby," she said, eyes full, "they're finally listening." He didn't say anything at first. Just looked down at his notebook where he'd been working on a puzzle involving palindromic prime numbers. Then softly, "Do I have to wear a tie?" Carla laughed. "Only if you want to scare him a little." Malik smiled. But it wasn't about scaring anyone. It was about being heard. And as the buzz around Hamilton Ridge grew louder, as emails continued pouring in, and meetings were scheduled behind closed doors, one truth began to rise above the noise. Malik Jennings hadn't just cleared his name. He had exposed a fault line that had gone ignored for years. And now that it was visible, the district had no choice but to reckon with it. Because sometimes the smartest kid in the room is the one no one thought to call on. And when he finally speaks, everyone has to stop and listen. The invitation sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Malik said anything about it. Aunt Carla had read it aloud the moment it arrived, her voice trembling with pride, an official letter from the Lucas County Office of Education, inviting Malik Jennings to speak at the Countywide Equity in Education Forum. She'd folded it carefully, set it beside the fruit bowl, and waited for him to bring it up in his own time. On the fourth night, as she stirred a pot of chili, and Malik silently worked through a logic puzzle at the kitchen table, he finally said, "Do I have to wear a suit?" Carla turned, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and smiled. "Only if you want to scare him into listening." Malik didn't look up. "I don't want to scare anyone. Then after a beat, I just want them to hear it right." And he meant that. Because ever since the retest, ever since the hallway whispers turned into classroom nods and teacher glances, softened into something like recognition, Malik had felt something shift. It wasn't fame, and it definitely wasn't comfort. It was something deeper. Responsibility. And that feeling had only grown in the weeks since. The auditorium at the county education office was bigger than any room Malik had ever stood in alone. Rows of folding chairs stretched out in every direction, filled with teachers, principals, district leaders, and board members. No cameras, just quiet anticipation. When they called his name, he walked slowly to the podium, his sneakers almost silent against the polished floor. He didn't adjust the mic. He didn't shuffle papers. He just looked out across the room and began. "I don't like talking in front of people," he said, and a soft wave of knowing chuckles rippled through the crowd. Malik didn't smile, but he felt it. "I like solving problems, not just math ones, any kind, because with problems, there's always an answer. You just have to find the right way to see it." He paused, let that land. "But sometimes the real problem isn't the numbers. It's the way people look at you, or don't look at you at all." The room quieted. He glanced down once, then up again. "I'm not mad that I was doubted. I'm used to it. But I am tired. Tired of having to be perfect just to be seen as normal. Tired of people thinking quiet means slow, or that different means wrong." Heads nodded across the crowd. Principals leaned forward. One teacher in the second row quietly wiped a tear from her cheek. "When I took that test the first time," Malik continued, "I just solved it, like I always do. And when they asked me to do it again, I didn't argue. I just did it, not because I wanted to prove something, but because I didn't want the next kid to go through what I did." He gripped the sides of the podium, not out of nerves, but to steady something inside him. Some kids don't raise their hands anymore, not because they don't know the answer, but because someone already decided they weren't worth calling on. I've seen it since fourth grade. I still see it. He looked around the room, locking eyes with no one, and yet somehow everyone. "I don't want an apology. I want classrooms where quiet kids still get heard, where thinking differently isn't punished or pushed aside. I want teachers to believe in kids before they decide who matters." Then softly, "That's all." And with that, he stepped back, gave a small nod, and returned to his seat. The applause didn't erupt immediately. It rose slowly like dawn breaking, and then swelled into a standing ovation. Not for a performance, for a truth that had been sitting in every school hallway, every overlooked desk, every uncalled hand for far too long. In the days that followed, the district's response was swift and public. Superintendent Klein issued a statement recognizing the need for urgent reforms in how high-potential students were identified and supported, especially those whose strengths didn't fit the usual molds. A new initiative was announced, a pilot program called Bright Paths, designed specifically to nurture non-traditional learners. The program would begin at Hamilton Ridge with plans to expand across the district. The goal wasn't to label students, but to meet them where they were and grow from there. Back at Hamilton Ridge, room 204 sat empty one Monday morning. A white sheet of paper taped to the door read, "Class temporarily reassigned to room 1 and 12. No fanfare. No farewell, Ms. Trask had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of a district investigation, and within a week she quietly submitted her resignation. There was no final lesson, no goodbye speech, just an inbox full of automated out-of-office replies and a locked classroom door. Some staff felt unsettled, others felt relieved. A few admitted they'd seen signs for years, subtle dismissals, selective encouragement, but hadn't known what to do about it. In the following staff meeting, one teacher finally said what many had been thinking: "We can't keep confusing discipline with fairness. Just because a classroom is quiet doesn't mean it's just." In the meantime, Malik returned to his usual routine. He still sat in the third row, still wore his favorite gray hoodie, but now when he raised his hand, it was met with acknowledgement. When he offered an answer, teachers listened, and not just to the solution, but to how he got there. In the newly launched Bright Pass program, Malik found himself among students who had never been flagged as gifted before. Kids like Terrence, who always doodled geometric shapes in the margins of his spelling test, or Lila, who read biology books for fun, but never spoke up in science class. The program wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Every Wednesday, the group met in the library, solving logic puzzles, exploring open-ended problems, even writing reflections about how they approached learning. One afternoon, Lila leaned over and whispered, "I thought I was weird for thinking like this." Malik looked at her and said simply, "Same," then smiled. "But I guess it's not weird anymore." Outside the classroom, the ripple effect continued. More teachers began requesting professional development on recognizing non-traditional learners. The district introduced a revised rubric for identifying giftedness that included creativity, persistence, and problem-solving, not just standardized test scores. Parents were invited into the process, asked to share observations about their children's learning styles. It wasn't a revolution, but it was real. And Malik, he never sought the spotlight, but he didn't shy away from it either. When a local news outlet asked to interview him, he declined. "I'm not the story," he told the reporter. "The change is." At home, Aunt Carla framed a copy of the district newsletter that featured a quote from Superintendent Klein. "Malik Jennings reminded us that intelligence doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it works quietly until the room is ready to listen." She hung it on the living room wall right beside Malik's drawing of a tessellation pattern he'd done in 5th grade. "You know this isn't just for you," she said, adjusting the frame. "It's for every kid coming behind you, so they don't have to fight as hard to be seen." Malik looked at the headline, "How One Boy Helped Hamilton Ridge." "Hear the quiet ones," and nodded. He didn't need awards. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to learn. And now finally no one was standing in his way. Because what changed wasn't just one classroom or one teacher. What changed was the question people started asking: who else have we missed? Who else might be quietly brilliant, patiently waiting for someone to notice? Malik's story didn't end in a speech or resignation. It lived in every hand that got called on after being ignored, in every teacher who paused before making an assumption, in every kid who realized they weren't strange, they were gifted in their own way. And sometimes that's all it takes. One voice, spoken softly, heard clearly, and remembered. Malik Jennings didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand attention. He didn't need to prove himself through anger, defiance, or theatrics. He simply did what he always did: solve problems quietly, persistently, and with a kind of grace that most adults would envy. And that's where the heart of this story lies. The lesson we draw from Malik's journey is this: never underestimate the quiet ones. In a world that often celebrates loud talent, flashy confidence, and traditional success metrics, students like Malik remind us that intelligence comes in many forms. Some children process deeply before they speak. Some observe before they participate. Some learn differently but no less powerfully. And when systems are too rigid or too narrow to recognize that real potential gets left behind. Malik's story also reveals a hard truth: bias, even unspoken, can shape futures. When a teacher assumes that only a certain kind of student can excel, they don't just overlook talent, they deny it the chance to grow. What began as one boy being accused of cheating ended up exposing years of exclusion and narrow thinking. But it also became a turning point. To parents and educators listening now, let this be your reminder. Look closer, ask better questions, listen more carefully, especially to the students who aren't the first to raise their hand or the loudest in the room. You may be sitting beside brilliance and not even realize it. To students, your value isn't defined by how loudly you speak or how quickly others notice. Keep showing up. Keep thinking differently. Keep learning not for praise, but because knowledge is your power, even if the world hasn't caught up yet. And to anyone who has ever been overlooked, doubted, or made to feel small because they didn't fit the mold, Malik's story is your reminder that your quiet strength can shake walls. That being underestimated isn't a curse. It's just the beginning of a louder truth waiting to be told. We're honored to share these powerful stories with you, stories that don't just entertain but inspire change. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real heartfelt stories that shine a light on everyday moments of injustice, courage, and transformation. Together, let's keep listening to the quiet ones. They often have the most to teach us.